Hi everyone, my name's Adisa the Verbalizer. I'm a poet. I've been writing poetry for the last 25 years of my life, and most of that time is spent inside the walls of education. And it's a great honor to be here today to share the idea that Jonny and I put together on poetry retreats.
And my name is Jonny. I'm the director of OtherWise Education and a primary teacher at Park Primary in Stratford, and I work with Adisa on poetry retreats.
Now every year we take a group of students and their teachers away on a poetry retreat. And in that space, they are given the time and space to generate great poetry around their environments. We get them to focus on poetry, writing, and listening that matters a lot to them. So it's very personal.
That's right. So we've done 5 of these together now. So we thought that what would be really useful today is if we could share with you 3 tips that we've found, having done this a few times, to get children to write meaningfully for themselves. So our 3 tips are going to be about seizing the poetry of every day. We're going to talk about how we create a sense of freedom and creativity. And we are also going to talk about suspending schoolishness.
Let's get started by watching a video called Voodoo Moon.
Yeah, that's a voodoo moon over there.
What is it?
A voodoo moon.
Voodoo moon, apparently.
It's a
Voodoo moon.
voodoo moon.
Look, it's a voodoo.
God, isn't it?
What's it called? I call it a voodoo moon.
How we get children to really think deeply about what's around them and what's important is to really focus in on the 5 senses. But what we like to do is to isolate 1 or 2 of the senses and really focus on one. So sometimes we're thinking about what you can see, and sometimes we say, okay, shut the eyes, think about sound, think about what you can hear around you, from your heartbeat to the sound of the gravel on your feet as you're walking. And we think about rhythms a lot. We think a lot about rhythms we create.
One of the things that we do is we get children to notice what's around them socially and to notice the poetry that is just around them all of the time in their interactions with others. So this links us on to another little video called Excuses. This is a video that we took after a child was in their pod. We woke them up in the morning and they were in this weird scene where it looked like one was about to headbutt the other. And as soon as I stepped through the door, the kid fell backwards and was like, "Sir, it was only a light headbutt." And our response to this, when we could see it was only a joke, was, "You should write this. That could be the first line of your poem." And this is what he came up with.
Poem, the excuse poem. But sir, it was only a light headbutt. But sir, it was only 3 punches. But sir, it was only a kick to the head. But sir, I just made a hole in the pod. But sir, I just dropped your phone down the hill. Okay then, no more excuses, sir.
And it's a really good example of this principle of that should be a poem, you should write it. So the whole idea behind it is sometimes just the things that children say to each other in their day-to-day has got a poetic quality in and of itself. And for them to start attuning themselves to it is a great way for them to start accessing poetry and recognizing that they can do it for themselves. Okay, let's have a look at our next one. So our next area is freedom, and I'm going to introduce you to another one of our pupils who's got one of their poems to share.
I tried to think of something, but then it ran out the door. It was as if someone froze time. It was as if I was waiting to cross the line. Nothing mattered, but people continued to chatter. I didn't feel happy, I didn't feel sad, I didn't feel good, I didn't feel bad. You're probably thinking, I'm in the middle. I'm just sharing my experience, it's not original.
The idea of developing freedom with children is really important because poetry is about freedom. Freedom to create, freedom to put your ideas down on the page. And the first thing that's really important that we get across to students is that there's no restriction on your time. There's not like a time restriction. You've got to have that finished in 15 minutes. It's got to be ready, got to be perfect, got to be edited up. No, you've got time to think about it, to leave it, to come back to it, to layer it up, to build it, to see the poem grow. Also, when it comes to freedom, it's freedom to say, well, this is what moves me. This is what I care about. Now, it could be a simple thing like a meal, your favorite meal. And then we link the idea to a meal relating to a person, a really important person in your life. And we looked at that in a really in-depth way, the idea of a food, link it to a person that means a lot to you. And we looked at things like loss, and we looked at things like sadness, loneliness, and joy, and love. Between the connection between food and a person that's really important in your life. We also looked at the idea of racism. A lot of the young people who normally live in London, moving out to the retreats to for a week. It's a different environment. They might not see that many people who look like themselves. And how did that make them feel? And how do they feel if they do experience racism? How do they normally deal with that? How do they interact with it? And this space, the freedom to say how they felt about that was really awesome. And talk about it, as a young person growing up in that environment, and how they can challenge racism through their writing. And also what was happening in the news at the time, on one of our retreats, was the whole stories about refugees and not being accepted into the country, and how they felt about that. They had a chance to share their empathy. And poetry is driven by empathy, trying to understand other people's situation. And we find that really works.
Now, we also wanted to share what the children think about this. So we spoke to Hassan, one of our pupils. Hassan, you took part in this year. What was it like for you having all of this freedom in your writing during the poetry retreat?
So it felt a bit hard because you weren't sure what to do by yourself, but then later, so on the first few days you weren't sure what to do by yourself, and then later you started to get the hang of the freedom.
Thank you, Hassan, so much for joining us. So our third point is all about this idea of family and about suspending schoolishness. The poetry retreats feel very different. Let's see what one of the children thought during the retreat.
And the other thing that's changed is that on the first day, we were all noisy school kids and teachers and stuff. But actually, as the time went on, we've all developed a sense of family kind of.
One of the things that was really interesting was how different it felt on this retreat comparing it to other residential school trips. The whole vibe was not particularly schoolish. All of the children engaged really well, and despite having many pupils selected for this project because they had been struggling in school, we've never really had anything other than full, eager participation. Now, part of that is the joy of being able to do active stuff, but what we are doing is just wandering and exploring. There's a sense of freedom in our actions as well as in our writing that characterises what we do. The whole relationship that developed between people was brilliant. Obviously, the children don't know each other at the start of the retreats. They come from all different schools, and it's a huge part of it is the social side as well as the writing side.
So that's our 3 ideas of what we can learn from our poetry retreats. And the final tip we'd like to share is what you can do in the classroom as teachers to create some of that magic from the poetry retreat. And I think first and foremost is the space, the environment. How can we change the environment? So sometimes we can just move all the tables to the side, have a circle of chairs, work in a circle, and allow them the space to create stuff that they might not even want to share, just create it. And also the freedom again, back to the idea of freedom. Sometimes you write form poetry, like a haiku poem, it has a strict discipline. And sometimes allow it to be completely free verse. Just, hit the page, don't stop writing, stream of consciousness, see what comes out. That in itself won't be a poem, but inside that outpouring could be a great idea, a great one line, which could be then nurtured into a great poem.
As well as creating your own social space in the classroom, you could of course just take us on and we'll go on a retreat with you. That would be the dream, wouldn't it? In all seriousness, do that, but also in all seriousness, a big part of it is about listening. In the poetry classroom and the poetry culture that we create on the retreats, a huge part of it is getting children to step away from seeing them sharing as the most important thing and to value the importance of listening to each other. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I'm sure we want to continue doing poetry retreats long into the future. Maybe some of you will do them with us. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, be yourself in the classroom, be as authentic as you can be when teaching poetry. Bring poetry that you love and adore into the space to kickstart the sessions. That way I think the young people really attach to it.